Mario Rivera Martino, considered by many in the island as the Bible of boxing. Mario, I know you have a long history in boxing. How did you get started in it?
Well, let me tell you, I got started in boxing when I was still in less than my teenagers. I started in boxing as a shoeshine boy. In 1935, when I was already in New York, in Manhattan, Pedro Montañez, lightweight, and Sixto Escobar, bantamweight, were the first national boxing heroes of Puerto Rico. And the Puerto Rican colony in New York was beginning to grow at that time. And the focal point was a place located around 110th Street and obviously right off Central Park North. Yeah, Central Park North. And there was a restaurant called Fuentes where Montañez and Sixto had their hangout, and it was there at that point that I got to know these two brilliant fighters who are now, by the way, in the Hall of Fame, the first Puerto Ricans to be in the Hall of Fame. And at that precise moment, I was part of that group just by shining shoes.
Okay.
Their shoes, I should say.
I have to ask you, I know as them being great legends that we read about and you having the experience to see them, I want you to briefly tell us, how was the atmosphere in New York when the fights took place with Sixto Escobar and Pedro Montañez? What was the atmosphere like, and how were they as fighters? What did you experience?
You have to remember one thing, that the only two international athletes from Puerto Rico were these two young men. There was no baseball, there was no Cepeda, there was no other baseball players, basketball players, or anybody connected in an international matter the way Montañez and Sixto Escobar were connected. So it was the beginning of the knowledge, worldwide knowledge of Puerto Rico for many people. Many people didn't even know where Puerto Rico existed. They used to confound Puerto Rico with Costa Rica and vice versa. So there was no knowledge about that. And the colony in Puerto Ricans in New York was beginning to flourish at that time in 1930, in the early 1930s. And Sixto and Pedro were the figures that were outstanding. Sixto because he became the first Puerto Rican champion by winning the bantamweight title, and Pedro because he toured Venezuela, he toured Europe, Venezuela undefeated, he toured Europe, and then came to the States in '35 undefeated in that brilliant tour that he had through all these European countries and Venezuela. So when Sixto and Pedro came to Puerto Rico, it was sort of a new beginning. It was a new sports beginning for the Puerto Rican fans. I think they are possibly the figures that all Puerto Ricans admire the most, because they began this historic rise of Puerto Ricans in boxing.
Okay. I know through the history you've met a lot of different boxers. One boxer is very, very popular is Joe Louis. I know you covered him. I would like you to speak to us a little bit about that.
Okay. In 1942, just out of high school, 1942, 1943, just out of high school in New York, I went into the Army as a specialist in communications. The fact that I was bilingual, which was a big thing then, not now, was very important, and I got into communications and into transmitting Morse code in German, Japanese, and obviously the American through for a number of years. But at the same time, Louis was also touring the army camps, and I connected with Nat Fleischer at that time. I say, hey Nat, I had already met Nat as a boy. Louis is touring the army camps in my area. He says, why don't you cover that for Ring Magazine? So the first article that I ever covered was a Ring Magazine article related to a Joe Louis tour of army camps when he was already in the declining stage but touring the army camps.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your time with the Ring Magazine and who are some of the boxers that you covered while you were with them.
Okay, following that period, I then returned to Puerto Rico about 1948, and Fleischer, I went to visit Nat Fleischer, and I said, Nat, I'm going to Puerto Rico. I says, we don't have, he said, a correspondent for the Caribbean area. Would you be willing to do that for us? I said, of course, happily, there's no problem. So when I got to Puerto Rico immediately, back in 1947, 48, I began a tour of duty that lasted about, for Ring Magazine, that lasted over 60 years, covering boxing in all of the Caribbean area. I covered the rise of Alfredo Escalera. I covered Wilfredo Gomez, his big events in Puerto Rico and in Nevada. I covered the big events of Esteban de Jesus. I covered the fight when Esteban beat Roberto Duran. I covered all of the early big stars. I failed to mention Angel Espada. I failed to mention Carlos Ortiz, of course, and Wilfredo Benitez. All those great Puerto Rican boxers. I had the pleasure of covering their events within the Caribbean area.
I know you also ran for the San Juan Star. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with them?
Okay, also I had the pleasure that once I got back, the only English-speaking paper in Puerto Rico was the San Juan Star, and I began to write a weekly column for the San Juan Star for about 25 years, in conjunction with what I was doing for Ring Magazine. So I did handle boxing exclusively for the San Juan Star.